Little MAGA girl was told by leftist professor that she can't read the Bible, but a WWII veteran unexpectedly appeared, and what he does leaves everyone shocked. Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story, and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from. The atmosphere inside Liberty High School felt nothing like Liberty that early Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning hummed with a low, monotonous drone, circulating recycled air that smelled of clinical disinfectant and spiritual apathy. To Dora, a young girl of just 14, that building of concrete and glass wasn't a temple of learning, but a prison for souls. Sitting in the third row, near the window that offered a barred view of the grey parking lot, she looked like a solitary point of light in an ocean of conformity. Dora wore a modest yellow dress, a soft shade of daffodil, which her mother had hand-sewn. It was a garment that spoke of simpler times, of classic femininity, and of an innocence that the modern world seemed hell-bent on eradicating. While her classmates wore baggy clothes, stamped with nihilistic slogans or logos of corporate brands, funding the very cultural decay surrounding them, Dora remained true to who she was. A little MAGA girl, raised with values that, in that environment, were considered more dangerous than any weapon. She kept her head down, her golden hair falling like curtains over her face, desperately trying to blend into the school furniture. The environment was hostile in a way that didn't need words to be felt. On the classroom walls, where portraits of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln might have once hung, now hung colorful posters with confusing terminology about gender, diagrams of social privilege, and clenched fists of revolutions preaching resentment. The American flag, once the focal point of pride in any classroom, was relegated to a dusty corner, almost hidden behind a smart board glowing with the screensaver of a globalist corporation. Dora felt the weight of that oppressive architecture on her fragile shoulders. She knew she was a stranger in her own land, a budding conservative in soil that had been salted by radical progressivism. Study hall had started 10 minutes ago, a vague period where the teacher was supposed to merely supervise silent study. Most students, teenagers with glazed eyes and slumped postures, were immersed in the hypnotic glow of their smartphones, consuming short videos of vulgar dances or influencers preaching hatred for tradition. The silence was filled only by the sound of fingers tapping on glass screens. But Dora had something different. With slow and almost furtive movements, as if handling a state secret, she pulled a small, heavy object from her backpack. It wasn't a tablet, nor a gaming device. It was a holy Bible bound in aged brown leather, the edges of the pages gilded. Though the gold was faded from constant use, that book was her anchor. It had been a gift from her grandmother, a woman who lived through times when America was united and God-fearing. On the first page, in shaky but elegant cursive, was written, "To my dear Dora, the truth shall set you free, even when the world tries to chain you. With love, Grandma." Dora ran her thumb gently over the inscription before opening to Psalms. She needed those words. Earlier that day, she had heard whispers in the hallways, mocking giggles about her family, about the patriotic bumper sticker on her father's truck. She felt small, isolated, a lone voice the system tried to silence through fear and social ostracism. Reading the Bible wasn't just a religious act for her. It was an act of silent resistance. It was her way of saying, without moving her lips, that she belonged to something greater and more eternal than the fleeting trends of that indoctrinating public school. As her eyes scanned the verses, seeking refuge in the promise of divine protection, the temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. The front door opened with an unnecessary bang, and Professor Sterling entered. If the classroom was a den, Sterling was the hungry lion, though he looked like a modern bureaucrat polished by the veneer of academic arrogance. He was a man of average build who walked with the presumption of a moral giant. He wore an impeccable, slim-fit suit, too expensive for a teacher's salary. suggesting connections or funds from outside activism. On his lapel, aggressively shining, was a pin featuring the rainbow flag intertwined with other radical left symbols, a badge of tribal loyalty he displayed like a medal of honor. Sterling didn't teach, he preached. His social studies classes were, in reality, prolonged sessions of deconstructing American history. He was the archetype of the furious leftist, the intellectual who despised the working class and deeply hated religion, viewing it as the opiate preventing the utopian revolution he dreamed of commanding. His eyes, behind thick, black-rimmed glasses, swept the room not with the affection of an educator, but with the vigilance of a censor looking for heretics. He detested silence, not imposed by him. He detested individuality that didn't fit into his identity boxes, and above all, he detested what Dora represented. He walked down the center aisle, his designer shoes making a dry, authoritative sound on the linoleum. The students with phones didn't even bother looking up. They were already domesticated, knowing that as long as they expressed no critical thought, they would be safe. But Sterling was restless that day. The political news had irritated him. The resurgence of patriotism in national polls was, to him, a personal affront. He needed a target. He needed to reaffirm his power, to prove that within those four walls, his ideology was supreme law. That was when he saw her. The afternoon sunlight filtering through the window fell directly onto Dora's yellow dress and, more importantly, onto the open book in her hands. The brown leather, the format of the text columns, the red silk ribbon marking the page. It was unmistakable. To Professor Sterling, that wasn't a student reading, it was a provocation. It was a symbol of the enemy infiltrating his secular sanctuary. The sight of the Bible acted on him like a red rag to a bull. His nostrils flared, and the mask of academic civility began to melt, revealing the twisted face of intolerance. Dora, immersed in reading, took a split second too long to notice the shadow that had paused over her desk. When she sensed the presence and looked up, her heart raced. Professor Sterling was standing there, immobile, staring at the holy book with a mixture of disgust and malicious triumph. He had found his prey. The silence in the room changed texture. It became heavy, electric. Some nearby students, sensing the tension radiating from the professor, lowered their phones and began to watch, smelling drama like sharks smell blood in the water. Dora instinctively tried to close the book, her small hands trembling visibly. She shrank back, trying to take up less space, trying to disappear inside herself, but it was too late. She was exposed. The little MAGA girl, with her faith and sweetness, was about to face the fury of a system that did not forgive dissent. She was alone, unarmed, and the predator was ready to strike. The icy fear running down her spine wasn't just of a school reprimand. It was the instinctive fear of someone who knows they are about to be sacrificed on the altar of a cruel ideology. The exposure was complete, and Dora's vulnerability was total. The silence that had settled in the classroom was shattered not by a bell, nor by an emergency alert, but by the sharp, venom-filled sound of Professor Sterling's voice. It was a sound that seemed to tear the air, loaded with a performative indignation he had meticulously rehearsed over years of academic activism. "What do you think you are doing, bringing this kind of hate material into my classroom?" The question wasn't asked to get an answer. It was a verdict. Sterling projected his voice to echo in every corner of the room, ensuring every student, every young and impressionable mind present, witnessed the spectacle. He pointed a finger, shaking with contained rage, his manicured nail accusing the sacred object in the girl's hands as if it were a nuclear weapon about to detonate. Dora felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart, which had previously beaten in a calm rhythm of prayer, now galloped uncontrollably against her ribs like a bird trapped in a violently shaken cage. She clutched the Bible to her chest, in an instinctive reflex of protection. Her fingers turned white around the worn leather cover. She didn't want to defy anyone. She just wanted peace. It's just my Bible, sir," Dora whispered, her voice coming out so weak it could barely be heard above the hum of the AC. She looked up, eyes wide and watery, hoping to find some humanity behind the professor's thick lenses. "I was reading quietly. It's my study hall." But Dora's meekness was the fuel Sterling's bonfire of vanity lacked. To the leftist, submission and politeness weren't virtues. They were signs of weakness, remnants of a traditional upbringing he despised. The girl's innocent response only served to confirm in his twisted mind that she was indoctrinated, a victim of family values that needed to be corrected by the force of the state and enlightened education. Sterling let out a short, cruel laugh, a dry sound devoid of any humor. He took 2 more steps, aggressively invading Dora's personal space. His shadow now covered her completely, eclipsing the sunlight coming through the window. The smell of his expensive cologne and the subtle aroma of coffee mixed with the metallic scent of fear emanating from the girl. "I don't care if you're quiet," he thundered, leaning over the desk until his face was inches from hers. Dora recoiled in her chair, pressing her back against the hard plastic, trying to create any distance possible. "Silence doesn't change the fact that you are polishing a symbol of oppression right under my nose. This is a secular educational institution, girl. We believe in science, in progress, in social evolution, not in oppressive fairy tales written by dead white men thousands of years ago to control the masses." The class, now fully awake from their digital stupor, watched the scene with a mix of morbid fascination and terror. No one moved. No one dared say, "Stop." The fear of being Sterling's next target, of having their grades docked, or being labeled intolerant in front of peers, paralyzed any instinct of decency. Some students, the most cynical ones, raised their cell phones, in camera lenses focusing on Dora's terrified face, ready to stream her humiliation live to the world, seeking likes at the expense of another's pain. Sterling, feeling empowered by the captive audience, began to gesture frantically. His arms cut the air as he spewed the typical rhetoric of the radical left, words he used as clubs to beat down the students' self-esteem. "You and your people." He spat the words with evident disgust, looking at her yellow dress as if it were an enemy flag. "You, with your red hats, your flags on the porch, and your outdated ideas about family and God. You think you can impose your morality here? You think America still belongs to that retrograde fantasy? Not on my watch, not in my classroom." He was out of control now, drunk on his own power. He didn't see a 14-year-old child crying in front of him. He saw a political enemy. He saw conservatism, patriotism, Christian resistance, everything he hated personified in that fragile body. He spoke of socialism as the cure for a sick society, preached tolerance while practicing the purest intolerance, and labeled the girl's silent faith as dangerous and aggressive. "But, sir," and Dora tried to speak, her voice choked by impending tears starting to overflow and run down her pale cheeks. "My grandma gave me this book. It speaks of love." "Love?" Sterling shouted, cutting her off brutally. "This is hate speech in disguise. This book has been used to justify wars, slavery, and discrimination. Bringing it into this safe space is an act of violence against your classmates who might feel offended by this archaic mythology." The logic was perverse, circular, and impenetrable. Dora felt the world spin. She was being accused of violence while sitting still, motionless and terrified. She was being called an oppressor by a grown man screaming at a child. The injustice of the situation was physical. It hurt her chest, made it hard to breathe. She looked around, seeking a friendly gaze, a gesture of support, but found only camera lenses and averted faces. She was completely alone, isolated on an island of public humiliation. Where is the freedom? She thought desperately. Where is the country my dad says is free? In Daesh, it seemed that those constitutional rules, those beautiful words about inalienable rights, evaporated the moment one crossed the gate of that school. There, the only law was Professor Sterling's ideology. Sterling, seeing the total despair in the girl's eyes, smiled. It was the smile of a predator who knows the prey has stopped running. He felt victorious. He had broken her resistance. Now, it was time for the final blow, the demonstration of absolute authority that would cement his dominance over the room. "Enough," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm and authoritative tone. He extended an open hand, palm up, demanding surrender. "Give that to me. Now." Dora hugged the Bible tighter, shaking her head no amidst the sobs. It was all she had there. It was her connection to God, to her family, to her sanity. Handing over the book felt like a betrayal of her grandmother, a surrender to evil. "I said, give it to me!" Sterling bellowed, losing patience. He lunged and, in a sharp physical move that crossed every ethical line of an educator, grabbed the edge of the book. There was a brief tug-of-war, Dora's small, trembling hands against the professor's strong, manic hands. "No, please don't," she begged, tears staining the yellow fabric of her dress. "I'm confiscating this as evidence," he snarled, pulling hard. "And you are going to the principal's office immediately. I'm filing a disciplinary report for inciting hate and insubordination. Let's see if your parents like knowing their little daughter is disturbing the peace of the academic environment." With a final violent yank, Sterling ripped the Bible from Dora's hands. The sound of leather slipping from her fingers was the sound of defeat. Dora collapsed onto the desk, hiding her face in her arms, sobbing openly, her body shaken by spasms of uncontrollable crying. The little MAGA girl was shattered. The system had crushed her. The professor held the book aloft like a trophy of war, panting, his eyes shining with the adrenaline of institutionalized bullying. The room was plunged into unbearable tension. The air felt electric, charged with the negative energy of raw injustice. Evil seemed to have won. Innocence had been punished, and faith ridiculed. Sterling adjusted his suit, feeling like the master of the universe, ready to deliver one more sentence, ready to banish the girl from his sight and consolidate his victory over outdated values. But he didn't know. No one in the room knew. While Dora cried, believing everything was lost, and while Sterling rejoiced in his petty tyranny, fate was about to turn the page. The classroom door, which had been left ajar after the professor's dramatic entrance, was still there, and through it, something ancient, something powerful and infinitely stronger than Sterling's hollow ideology was approaching. The breaking point had been reached, and the universe demanded a correction. The darkness was deep, but it was in exactly this kind of darkness that the light of true justice shone brightest. The leftist thought he had the last word. He was about to find out in the most shocking way possible that the real America hadn't had hers yet. The air inside the classroom seemed to have curdled, turning into a viscous, suffocating substance composed of fear and perverse triumph. Professor Sterling, holding the small leather-bound Bible above his head like a hunter displaying the pelt of a rare animal, looked at the class with a smile of smug satisfaction. Dora, the little MAGA girl, was reduced to a puddle of sobs on her desk, face hidden in crossed arms, shoulders shaking in spasms of pure desolation. To Sterling, this wasn't cruelty, it was ideological sanitation. He felt he was purifying the learning environment, removing the virus of traditional faith to protect the collective mind of his students. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Sterling announced, his voice dripping with arrogance as he walked back to his desk. The Bible still held hostage in his left hand. He grabbed his tablet with his right, fingers swiping quickly across the screen. "I am sending a notification to the administration and the school board right now. Zero tolerance for symbols of hate. And you, Dora." He turned to the shrinking girl, pointing his stylus pen like a magic wand of punishment. "Prepare for a suspension. Maybe with a few days at home, you and your fanatical parents can rethink your place in modern society." He was at the peak of his power. The system was on his side. The narrative was on his side. He was king of that little bureaucratic hill. He opened his mouth to utter the final sentence, to order Dora to leave the room and march to the principal's office, when the universe, tired of that injustice, decided to intervene. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't thunder. It was the rhythmic, dry, relentless sound of hardwood striking cheap linoleum. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was alien in that plastic and silicon environment. It was an analog sound, heavy, that cut through the AC's hum and froze the words in Sterling's throat. All eyes, including the professor's and Dora's, who lifted her swollen, tear-stained face, turned to the classroom door. The door, which had been merely resting against the frame, was pushed slowly, creaking on its hinges until it slammed hard against the inner wall. The hallway light invaded the room, creating a silhouette in the doorway. And what a silhouette! There he stood. Sergeant Major Scott. He didn't seem to belong to that century, let alone that school. He was a rock from ancient times, cast into the middle of a modern swamp. Scott was 90-something, his skin a map of deep wrinkles telling stories of harsh winters and scorching summers. But his posture was an affront to gravity and age. He stood erect, shoulders squared, chin up. He wore his full World War II dress uniform, the pinks and greens. The khaki wool fabric impeccably pressed, the creases in the trousers sharp enough to cut paper. On his chest, over the left pocket, a galaxy of metal and ribbon shone under the fluorescent lights. The silver star for gallantry in action, the purple heart with oak leaf clusters indicating multiple wounds, the European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal. Each of those medals wasn't just an ornament, it was a testament to spilled blood, lost friends, terror faced and vanquished. He wore his garrison cap slightly tilted, and in his right hand he held a polished walnut cane, which he used not as a crutch of invalidity, but as a scepter of authority. The veteran took a step inside the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Postmodern irony and teenage cynicism evaporated before the absolute gravity of that man. He exuded an aura of deadly seriousness, the kind of presence one only acquires when looking death in the eye and refusing to blink. "Take your hands off that girl and that book." Scott's voice rolled through the room, like the distant rumble of heavy artillery. It was a gravelly voice, scratched by time, but solid as granite. "Or you'll have to go through me first." Professor Sterling, taken completely by surprise, blinked confusedly. The initial shock of seeing that anachronistic figure in his modern classroom paralyzed him for a moment. But soon his instinct as a territorial bureaucrat kicked in. Who was this old man to give him orders? Sterling adjusted his glasses, trying to recover his posture of intellectual superiority. "Excuse me?" Sterling said, his voice cracking slightly, losing the authoritarian stridency of moments ago. "Who are you? You are not permitted to be here. This is a restricted area for staff and students. I'm in the middle of a disciplinary procedure and—" "Disciplinary procedure," Sergeant Major Scott interrupted, advancing across the room. Thud, thud, thud. With every beat of the cane, he gained ground, and Sterling seemed to physically shrink. "I see a grown man, in full possession of his physical faculties, terrorizing a defenseless child. In my day, We called that cowardice, and we dealt with cowards very differently than you folks do today." Sterling felt his face burn. The word coward hit him like a slap. He backed up until his back hit the smartboard. "I am not a coward. I am an educator. I am protecting these students from hate speech." He brandished the Bible again, trying to use the book as a moral shield. "This here is poison. It is archaic. It is against progress." The veteran stopped just 3 feet from the professor. The difference between the two was stark. On one side, the leftist, soft, fashionably dressed, armed with trigger words and fluid ideology. On the other, the warrior, calloused, dressed in history, armed with honor and absolute truth. Scott looked at the rainbow pin on Sterling's lapel, then into the man's eyes with cold, analytical contempt. "You speak of hate, son," said Scott calmly. "But I have seen true hate. I saw what happens when men decide they can ban books, burn ideas, and silence faith. I landed at Normandy in June 1944. The water was red with the blood of boys who never got the chance to grow old. I walked through the frozen forests of the Ardennes. I liberated camps where human beings were treated worse than cattle because of who they were and what they believed." He pointed a gnarled, trembling finger at the American flag, dusty in the corner of the room. "My brothers died for that flag. They died with their guts hanging out, screaming for their mothers in the mud, to guarantee that in this land no tyrant in a cheap suit could tell an American citizen what they can or cannot read, or to whom they can or cannot pray. The First Amendment isn't a suggestion, Professor. It is a blood pact, and you are spitting on the grave of every soldier who died to give you the right to stand there spouting that nonsense." The room was in sepulchral silence. The students, who minutes earlier were recording videos for TikTok, now listened with mouths agape. The reality of history, raw and bloody, had invaded the artificial bubble of the school. Dora, still crying softly, lifted her head. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She saw a giant defending her. Sterling, feeling control of the situation, slipped through his fingers, tried his last card, the nuclear weapon of the leftist arsenal, labeling. You are a fascist!" Sterling shouted, his voice high with panic. "That's what you are, a militarist, nationalist, imposing your patriarchal vision. You don't understand the modern context. You are the danger here." The veteran didn't back down. On the contrary, he let out a short, dry, terrifying laugh. He took one more step forward, invading Sterling's personal space with an intensity that made the professor tremble. "Fascist!" Scott repeated the word as if tasting spoiled wine. "Son, I killed real fascists. I fought against the swastika. I saw the face of totalitarianism and smashed it with the butt of my M1 Garand rifle. I know what tyranny is, and what I see here." He looked Sterling up and down with absolute disgust. "Is a petty little dictator who thinks power is making a 14-year-old girl cry. You are the oppressor you claim to fight. You have become what we destroyed." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sterling looked around, seeking support from the students, but found only looks of judgment. The mask of virtue had fallen. He wasn't the social justice hero. He was just a bully being confronted by a real man. His moral authority evaporated. He lowered the hand holding the Bible, arms shaking. "Give me the book," Scott ordered. It wasn't a request, it was a military command. Sterling, defeated by the unwavering strength of the veteran's character, hesitated for a second. But the fear in Scott's eyes was primal. He reached out and handed over the Bible. The veteran took the book with reverence, wiping the cover with the sleeve of his uniform, as if wiping away the spiritual filth the professor had left on it. "You have no authority here," Sterling muttered, trying to salvage some fragment of dignity as he retreated behind his desk, using the furniture as a physical barricade. "I'm calling security. I'm reporting this to the Union. You will be banned from this property." The system will take care of you, you old dinosaur. The system can try, replied Scott, turning his back on the professor as if he were no longer worth the attention. But as long as there is breath in these lungs, I will fight tyrants like you, whether on a beach in France or in a classroom in America. The veteran then turned to Dora. The transformation in his face was miraculous. The hard lines of combat softened into an expression of grandfatherly kindness. He walked to her desk, leaning on his cane, and held out the Bible to her. With the other hand, he pulled a white cotton handkerchief, impeccably clean, from his pocket. "Here, child," he said softly. "Dry your eyes. Tears are for the dead and for lost freedom, and today neither has happened here." Dora took the book and the handkerchief, her fingers grazing the old soldier's calloused hand. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. I thought I was wrong." "Never," said Scott, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Having faith isn't a mistake. Loving your country isn't a crime. They want you to feel ashamed because your strength and your faith scare them. They know that a person who kneels before God can stand before any man." In the back of the room, Sterling typed furiously on his computer, preparing the bureaucratic retaliation. The immediate danger had passed, physical confrontation avoided by the veteran's sheer moral force. But the war wasn't over. The leftist was wounded, humiliated, and vengeful. He would use every rule, every code, and every administrative contact to destroy both the girl and the old man. The institutional tension hung in the air like a storm, refusing to dissipate. But in that moment, in the eye of the hurricane, under the protection of the khaki uniform and the medals of honor, the little MAGA girl took a deep breath and stopped crying. She had been rescued, not by the system, but in spite of it. The battle of the day was won, but the fight for the soul of the school and the nation continued. The suffocating tension that dominated the classroom dissipated, replaced by something rare and precious in that sterile environment: reverent respect. Professor Sterling, now reduced to a small, bitter figure behind his modern design desk, continued to mutter threats about district regulations and code of conduct violations, but his words fell into the void. He had lost something no graduate degree or academic tenure could buy: moral authority. The students, teenagers who until then seemed like digital zombies, molded by apathy, watched the scene with new clarity. They had witnessed the clash between a manufactured ideology and unwavering truth, and the truth, dressed in a 1940s khaki uniform, had prevailed. Sergeant Major Scott, leaning on his cane with the dignity of a warrior king, turned to the class. He didn't need to shout. His presence filled the space. He looked into the eyes of every young person present, challenging them to be more than just statistics in a broken educational system. "Listen well, young people," said the veteran, his voice echoing with the gravity of history. "What happened here today wasn't about a book. It was about your souls. They want you to believe your heritage is shameful. They want you to hate the flag that gives you the right to sleep in peace at night. They want to erase God from the public square because they know a people without faith is a people easy to control." He paused, letting the words sink in. Dora, beside him, dried the last tears with the sergeant's handkerchief. She no longer felt like the helpless victim. Beside that man, she felt a strength growing inside her, a steel spine she didn't know she possessed. "You see this young lady?" Scott pointed gently to Dora. "She had the courage to be different. She had the courage to hold on to the word of God when the world told her to drop it. That ain't hate. That is character, and character is the only thing that will save this country when the storm comes. Don't let professors, politicians, or the media tell you who you should be. Be Americans. Be free. And never ever apologize for loving your country." In the back of the room, a boy wearing a hoodie covering his face, known for his indifference, slowly lowered his hood. Another girl, who was about to post a video mocking Dora, deleted the draft and put her phone in her pocket. A murmur of agreement ran through the rows. The spell of fear imposed by Sterling had been broken. The professor realized the tide had turned. He tried to stand up, face red with impotent indignation. "This is political indoctrination. You cannot—" Sterling started, but was interrupted by a collective laugh from the class. Not a cruel laugh, but a laugh of liberation. They now saw the absurdity of his hypocrisy. The tyrant was naked. The veteran ignored the professor's protest, as if it were the buzz of an irrelevant fly. He turned to Dora, his blue eyes shining with paternal pride. "Come on, child. This place doesn't deserve any more of your time today. The real lesson has just been taught." Dora nodded, grabbing her backpack. She held the Bible firmly against her chest, no longer hiding it, but displaying it as the shield of faith it was. She looked at Professor Sterling one last time, not with hate, but with genuine pity. She realized he was an empty man, filled only with anger and theories, while she had something eternal. "God bless you, Professor," said Dora, her voice clear and sweet, completely disarming the man with the Christian kindness he so despised. Sterling stood agape, unable to process forgiveness in the face of his aggression. Sergeant Major Scott offered his arm to the girl. "Let's go, little MAGA girl. We have a nation to rebuild, one heart at a time." They walked together down the center aisle of the classroom. The rhythmic sound of the cane and Dora's light steps marked the beat of victory. When they reached the door, something extraordinary happened. The boy in the hoodie started to clap, slowly at first, but soon others joined. In seconds, the room was applauding. It wasn't a loud stadium ovation, but a respectful, deep applause of recognition. They were applauding courage. They were applauding justice. As they left the room and entered the school hallway, the light seemed different. The afternoon sun streamed through the large glass windows, bathing the waxed floor in a golden glow. The air felt lighter, more breathable. Sergeant Major Scott stopped for a moment and looked at Dora. "You know why I fought, Dora?" he asked softly. "For freedom?" she replied. "Yes, but specifically for you," he said, voice choked with emotion. "When I was in the trenches, freezing, scared, I imagined the future. I imagined a girl like you, sitting in safety, reading her Bible, living her life in peace. Today, I saw that future threatened, but I also saw that future resist. You are proof that our sacrifice was not in vain." He took something from his uniform pocket. It was a small pin, old and worn, with the enameled American flag. "This pin has been with me since 1945, he said, placing it in Dora's hand. "I want you to keep it. Wear it with pride. When they try to silence you, look at it and remember that you have an army of angels and patriots behind you. The MAGA movement isn't just about politics, sweetheart. It's about loving who we are, loving our history, and protecting our innocence against these wolves." Dora squeezed the pin, tears returning to her eyes, but now they were tears of joy and gratitude. "I promise, sir, I won't ever give up. I'll make America proud." "I know you will." The old soldier smiled. They walked toward the main exit of the school. The image was iconic, the glorious past and the hopeful future walking side by side. The 90-year-old warrior and the 14-year-old girl. They were distant generations united by the indestructible bonds of faith, family, and freedom. As they pushed the double doors of the school and stepped out into the fresh, free air, Professor Sterling remained inside, trapped in his own bitterness, frantically calling administrators who couldn't undo what had happened. He might have the system, he might have the bureaucracy, but he had lost the soul of America. Outside, the American flag on the school flagpole fluttered vigorously against a clear blue sky, as if saluting the two heroes. Dora looked up at the stars and stripes and felt her heart swell. She wasn't just a scared girl anymore. She was a patriot. She was a warrior of light, and as long as there were men like Sergeant Major Scott to pass the torch, and girls like Dora to receive it, the flame of freedom would never be extinguished. Ideological tyranny had tried to strike, but it met the unshakable rock of traditional values. Justice had triumphed, and tomorrow seemed suddenly much brighter. America was still the land of the brave, the home of the free, and the refuge of the faithful, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could change that.